Hello, hello, hello. This is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. All right, so what I've done with the fiscal law is looked in module 1, 2, and 3 and some other fiscal law related topics, and I kind of meshed it all together into one video. So this is Fiscal Law 101 by Helen Thomas. So if you have not already subscribed to our YouTube page, please consider subscribing so that we can get more visibility on the YouTube platform. All right, so the basic idea behind fiscal law. We're going to start there as mentioned in your study guides. The expenditure of public funds is proper only when authorized by Congress. I can even stop there. So if you look in the congressional regulations, the laws, and something is not listed there, that means you cannot spend the funding for it if you cannot find it in that law. So Congress has to designate. So in my translation, we spend the funds based on what Congress tells us we can or cannot do with those funds. All right, so everything is based off of what the Constitution told us that we could do with those funds. And so constitutional authority, what does that mean? Article 1. So automatically when you see Article 1, even if you don't read anything else, remember from Module 1, we said that Article 1 deals with Congress, Article 2 deals with the President, and Article 3 deals with the courts. So automatically when you see Article 1, even if you don't know what Section 7 says, you already know the first thing is they're talking to Congress. So what does Article 1, Section 7 do? It empowers Congress to raise revenue for the country, to pay our bills. And so that is what that one does. All right, and next one that's important to us, Article 1, Section 8. Congress can collect taxes. So ensure that you understand that that is a power of Congress to raise taxes, to collect taxes. It is not a function of your president. And the most important constitutional authority, if you don't remember nothing else as a financial manager, is Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. This is the reason the government shuts down if we do not have an appropriation law in place, because it says you cannot take any money out of the Treasury unless you have an appropriations law or a continuing resolution, which is a temporary appropriation law in place. So make sure you understand that basis. Next, on the constitutional authority, I added in the GAO Red Book because you're going to learn about the Government Accountability Office. Congress tells us all these do's and don'ts with the appropriation, but Congress don't have the time to come back and make sure that we're following the rules. So they have an external auditing agency called the GAO. The Comptroller General is the individual, is the title of the individual in charge of the GAO. So when it comes to appropriation, you have the GAO Red Book. And it's like a stoplight. You got GAO Red Book for appropriation, GAO Yellow Book for auditing, and the GAO Green Book that deals with internal control. I always learn them together. Red, yellow, green. Appropriation, auditing, internal control. So we're going to look at the definition of an authorization versus an appropriation. And remember, your Congress is broken down into two parts. You have your Senate and you have your House of Representatives. And everything that goes through Congress must go through the House, and in duplicate form, it must go through the Senate. And they must then come to a consensus on one document that goes to the president to sign to become law. So what is authorization? So when we talk about the authorization law that is done by the House and Armed Services Committee, understand that the authorization is only approving the programs, the category of mission, the category of things that the government is allowed to do. Whereas where you get appropriation law, that is your funding tool. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee is responsible for the appropriations process. And I think I'm going to go over that again in a later video, or a later slide rather. And then we introduce continuing resolution, because that is a form of an appropriation law. That's that temporary law. If they haven't decided on the final budget, then you have a continuing resolution that is put into place so that the government does not shut down based on Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. Putting it all together. How does a bill become law? So this is a short version of it. First of all, a bill, general, is a proposal that may be proposed by a member of Congress, a committee in Congress, or by the president. Typically, the president during the State of the Union address will put out what they want to, what laws they plan on trying to implement, but the president can submit through Congress a proposal, and they place it in the hopper. So I'm going to see if I can get my little mouse here. Consideration by members. So once this is introduced, it goes to the actual committee that's responsible for that. If it's dealing with education, if it's dealing with more funding, or DOD or defense, they have a committee, and then the committee will do their hearings, their markups. They go through, they look at the information to determine if they agree, disagree, what questions they have. Do they agree with your justification? Do they need more? And so forth. Then the committee will take action. So they will then send it back to the originator. The originator will fix it based on their guidance, and you then submit a clean bill. Because I cleaned it up, all the marks you put on it, I cleaned it up. So that's our clean bill, which you see I underlined here. Then it goes, when it's clean, it goes, as I mentioned, on both the House floor and the Senate floor, because each side must review the same bill in identical form, and once they pass it, that one bill is what's submitted. So once one body approves the bill is considered an engrossed bill. That is a term used in the CDFM. So it's engrossed if it's passed, or when it's passed by one body or the other. It could be both at the same time or one body. It's engrossed. But unfortunately, both the House and the Senate do not always agree. So whenever they have disagreements, the House and the Senate has to come together. Whenever the House and the Senate comes together, their sole purpose is to resolve their differences. Whatever the House decides that they want to approve, and then the Senate disagrees, they have to come together in the third chamber, or what's called a conference. So anytime you hear conference committee, that should let you know that the House and the Senate is coming together to resolve differences, because only one document can go to the president for the president to sign for it to become law. And then the final step, after the bill has been passed in identical form, it then has to be enrolled to be submitted to the president for signature. All right, so we're going to look at the budget resolution process. We kind of touched on it when I showed the diagram of the House and the Senate, but the budget process starts with budget formulation, and all of this. OMB, Office of Management and Budget, which works for the president or the executive branch, issues the guidance. Organizations or the agencies develops their draft. They submit their drafts to the Office of Management and Budget, and the OMB does their hearing. OMB passback is what they decide that they're going to submit forward to the president to make that final decision. And once the president transmits the budget to Congress, this must be done no later than the first Monday in February. So the next action is what happens once the president transmits the budget to Congress no later than that first Monday in February is what does Congress do? The first step, or phase one, is the budget resolution process, which I touched on a few minutes ago. Which House and which Senate is responsible for the budget resolution process? That is the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee, as you can see here. So what do? You see, the CBO is Congressional Budget Office. So what happens is once they get the president's budget request, the Congressional Budget Office has to then pull up all the numbers. Think of an accountant. So they have to pull up the data from the previous approvals. They have to look at our deficit. How much do we owe? Do we have any surplus? What were the guidance from the last meeting? So all of that data is provided by the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, to the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. They then have to vote, review, mark up on their individual floors, and then they compare notes. If they have any differences, they have to come together. And what is it called when the House and Senate comes together? It is called a conference committee, or the third chamber, because only one bill can be approved to send forward for the president to sign. And so once they make a resolution in the conference committee, then they take it back to their individual floor. It's enrolled and sent to the president for signature. Another thing I want to say with the conference committee, because sometimes you get questions that ask when they have the conference, if let's say the House sends one member to the conference and the Senate sends 5 members to the Congress, and now they have to vote on this topic. Does the Senate have an advantage? And the answer is no, because they are voting as one body. So whenever they compare notes together, the bottom line is that one person is voting for the House. These 5 people must speak as one for the Senate. So there's no advantage. And then the conference committee resolves any more differences. Once it's resolved, then that is what. So also in the budget, let me go back one. Also, the end result of the budget resolution process is for them to say what the rules are when they look at the president budget. What are we not going to approve? What's our focus? Are there any limitations, guidelines, fences that we need to decide up front? That's what the budget is, a joint resolution process. So this does not go to the president for the president to sign. This is internal to Congress. So then the second phase of the budget process is the authorization process. And as I gave you the definition earlier, it authorizes programs only. So if funding is authorized in the authorization law, you still don't have a budget authority. You don't have the authority to spend the money. They only authorize the programs. Which House and which Senate is responsible for the authorization process? That is the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. Likewise, the action is the same. They, on their floors, they go through the information individually for the programs to decide which programs they're going to approve. And then differences are identified. They come together in the conference committee, go back to their floors, make sure there are no other issues or differences, come back in a conference to resolve any other differences. Once that one bill is approved, then that authorization process ends with it going to the president for the president to sign, and it becomes the authorization law, authorizing the programs that the president is allowed to execute for that upcoming fiscal year. And the third phase is the appropriation process. This is where you get the budget authority, the funding to operate the government. This is handled by the House Appropriation Committee and the Senate Appropriation Committee, as you see here. And the process is exactly the same. The same thing that happens on the House happens on the Senate floor. And then they come together to resolve differences in the third chamber or the conference committee. They go back to their individual floors, review the document again. If they have any other differences, again, they must come back together in a conference committee. Once they resolve the differences, then only one document is enrolled and sent forward for the president to sign, and then we complete the process with the appropriations law, which you see right here. So what does the president do? So the president budget goes to Congress. Congress does all those things I just discussed. And then once it's enrolled, it has to go back to the president for the president to sign for that bill to become law. So what are the options that the president have when it goes back to him or her? The president can approve and sign once they receive that bill, and it becomes law. Easy going. Or the president can veto the bill. What does that mean? He does not agree with any portion of the bill, so he returns it to the House that it originated, and with whatever objection that he has, the veto message. Understanding by the Constitution, the Congress has the ability to override the presidential veto if 2/3 of Congress agrees. So if the 2/3 of the House and the Senate can agree, they can override this presidential veto. However, the president also has two additional options. Option 1 says he does not sign it, but it still becomes law. Now, how is that possible? That is possible if a couple of conditions are in place. Once he receives the bill, Congress is in session, and the president fails to sign that bill or return it within 10 days, that bill will automatically become law. So those may be areas or instances where the president does not want to exert any energy against, because he's got bigger fish to fry, so he just allows it to become law. But the key thing here is with does not sign but allows the bill to become law is Congress has to be in session, and he doesn't sign it within the required 10 days, the bill automatically becomes law. Because the opposite can happen, a pocket veto. A pocket veto means that Congress is adjourned. They're not in session. However, the president receives the bill. He does not sign it within 10 days, but this bill does not become law. And the key thing, it does not become law because Congress is adjourned. So I want to make sure you understand the 4 conditions in where the president or options that the president has when he receives a bill. Remember, 10 days, Congress is either in session or not in session. And then that bill becomes law. I want to also introduce the 1996 Line Item Veto Act. President Clinton during this time was allowed, if he received the bill and he read through it and he did not like a portion of that bill, he was allowed to just line through that particular portion, initial it, sign the bill, it becomes law, deleting that particular option. He cannot, as of 1996, they can no longer do that. It was deemed unconstitutional actually back in 1998. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. So when they veto, if they disagree with one portion or any portion of that bill, the entire bill needs to be returned. So you need to make sure you understand if this comes up or you see it again, the line item veto is where they were allowed to mark through portions of the bill, sign it, and it still became law. Cannot do that anymore as of 1998. So I just threw in, once the budget is approved, the DoD related appropriations. Since it's a Department of Defense exam, you want to know what is related to the Department of Defense appropriation. That is your defense appropriation, military construction, veterans affairs, energy, and water. Then once Congress appropriates the fund, the appropriation law, president signs it, it becomes effective. There's a couple things that happens once Congress appropriates the funds. The first legal action is the Treasury issuing the Treasury warrant. What makes it legal? Because you can tie this step back to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution, where it says no money can be drawn from the Treasury, which is the nation's bank, unless you have an appropriation law in place. So the Treasury issuing the Treasury warrant is notification to the field that this particular action is ready, the accounts are set up and being prepared to pay. The second thing that happens on the administrative side. The agencies, SF-132 is submitted 10 days. Within 10 days of this appropriation, the DoD and the other agencies, Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Education, they all have to complete an SF-132, sending it back up to Office of Management and Budget, because that process begins once appropriation starts. So it's not that OMB automatically sends them funding. They have to submit the SF-132. It's like your parents have the money, but you have to go say, can I please have my allowance? They don't just automatically give it to you. So the SF-132 must be submitted from the agencies within 10 days of the appropriations, and OMB has 30 days to process the apportionment. So anytime you hear the word apportionment, Congress appropriates, OMB apportions, because you got a lot of A words you're going to have to remember, and these, they all start with A, so you need to know the difference. Appropriate, apportion, and then we're going to talk about allotment later. So OMB processes the SF-132s within 30 days of the appropriation and sends the funding apportionment down to the agencies. Then DoD issues allotment. For the organizations that fall under the Department of Defense, we get allotment for us to commit, obligate, and outlay. Outlay is the same thing as disbursement, but in the study guide, you're going to see the word outlay. It just means when the funds are removed from the Treasury to pay for an obligation. That term you need to be familiar with is an outlay. But the process doesn't end there in the execution, because the agencies also, every quarter, they have to submit an SF-133 document, because you're kind of looking at what we gave you. You asked for $1 million. We gave you $1 million as of the first quarter. How much have you executed at that point? So they have to submit this report, the SF-133, quarterly. And then we mentioned the GAO, Government Accountability Office, will provide that oversight, because they want to make sure that whatever Congress stated in those laws, that we are actually following them. All right, so we're going to look at some definitions of fiscal law to make sure that we understand when we're going through this process what they mean. I mentioned apportionment, Office of Management and Budget. So I forgot my budget part on it. But Office of Management and Budget is the resource manager. And actually, I'm going to fix this in a little bit. But this is Office of Management and Budget. OMB works for the president. They're the resource manager. And OMB apportions the fund. That's we look at allotment, but OMB apportions. These words are going to come in, be important later, because once you get into fiscal law and the Anti-Deficiency Act, and if they say they violate apportionment, then you got to understand apportionment does not happen at our level. In most cases, it happens at the DoD level. Budget authority granted to financial managers to obligate. In order for us to execute funds and obligate the government money, we must have the authority to do so. So just because the appropriation is approved or the funding is approved, we cannot automatically start spending. We have to get our authority, our appropriation, our allotment in our hands to be able to obligate the funds. Commitment, administrative reservation of funds. That's where you set the funds aside for a particular purpose. It's not legally binding. It's like, let's say you have $20 and you put that $20 in your pocket. You say you're going to lunch later today. You've committed that $20. So you haven't done anything else. You still got your $20. Obligation now is your legal reservation of funds. That means you legally bind the government in a contract, and we have to make payments based on that obligation. So you took your $20 that you had in your pocket, you left and you went to lunch. You ordered your food, you ate your food. You took the food, you ate it. Now you are obligated to pay for that meal. Obligations. When you pay for the meal, that's your outlay, because you no longer have that $20. You got to give that $20 to your server to pay for the meal. So outlay means the same thing as disbursement or expenditure. So the issuance of that electronic, whether it's cash or you gave them your debit card, ATM card, you're outlaying those funds from your account. What does it mean when it's legally available? Because as I mentioned, just because Congress appropriated the money, it does not automatically mean financial managers can start spending wherever they are. We have to have legal availability of those funds, budget authority. So an appropriation is legally available when occurs within the timeline of appropriation. As you know, every appropriation have a specific timeline in which you can obligate the funds. Whether it's O&M and MILPERS, which is our 1-year appropriations, RDT&E, which is a 2-year appropriation, procurement, a 3-year, shipbuilding, conversion, Navy, and military construction are 5-year appropriations. So the obligation occurs within the timeline of those appropriations. The purpose of the expenditure must be authorized. So if I'm using RDT&E procurement, I need to make sure that what I'm trying to buy, I'm using the right color of money to do so. So the purpose of the expenditure must be authorized. I must be authorized to do construction. I must be authorized to do that project. I must be authorized to make that purchase. And the obligation must be within the amount established by law, because as I mentioned, that Congress sometimes limits how much we can spend on a particular project. If it's a construction project, they might say you could spend no more than $5 million doing this project or this mission. So we must be within those timelines, those guidelines that were established. And availability of funds. So these are some terms you need to be familiar with. When I talk about the flow of funds, I said Congress appropriate, OMB apportions, DOD issues allotment. So keep that in mind, because you may see the term again that says unapportioned appropriation. So if you remember that order, it means it was already appropriated, but not yet apportioned. Likewise, unallotted. So that means the step that happened before it already occurred, which is apportionment. Funds apportioned, but not yet allotted. Unobligated allotment, meaning I have my allotment, but it's not yet obligated. Unpaid. I have my obligations, but I haven't paid my bills yet. Paid obligations. The funds that I have obligated have been paid, and then finally expired appropriation. That means those appropriations are no longer available for new contracts, new obligations. All right, so I just did this diagram to kind of show when you talk about PTA, purpose, time, and amount, when you deal with fiscal law, you got to understand that. U.S. Constitution drives what Congress is allowed to do, the power of the purse, when we talked about Article 1. And whenever you get appropriations, you have to consider the purpose, dealing with the necessary expense. You can't just spending the money willy-nilly. You got to also know, was it a necessary expense? Time. Do I need to make this purchase right now for a requirement that I have in the next fiscal year? Bona fide need has to be reviewed. And you see the 31 U.S. Code, the law that you will violate if these things are not followed. Amount, Anti-Deficiency Act, 31 U.S. Code, 1341, 1342, and 1517. So purpose states what I can buy. Time is when I can make that obligation, and amount says how much do I have, how much can I obligate at that time. So purpose, 31 U.S. Code, Anti-Deficiency Act, chapter 13, paragraph 1, 1301. Purpose, 31 U.S. Code 1301 says that I cannot spend any money unless it was for this particular purpose. Whatever it is I'm trying to do and whatever appropriation I'm trying to use got to be for that particular purpose. But you must consider this three-part test when you are getting ready to obligate the funds. The expenditure, what I'm trying to buy, must bear a logical relationship to the money or the color of money, the type of money that I'm trying to use to buy it. Logical relationship. So if I'm trying to do a construction project that's like $6 million, I can't use operation and management funding. I need construction funding. So that's what it's saying. Logical relationship to what you're trying to do. There must not be an existing law that prohibits me to make that purchase. So I need to also research, did Congress already say you cannot do this particular mission? Was it not part of the authorization? Did it not authorize that program? It might not have been authorized, so you cannot spend the money doing it. And the third part of the step, expenditure must not be otherwise available in some other statute or scope. What does that mean? Let's say a lot of times what I see is people trying to do a contract for a service that's already provided in the supply system. It's just submit your request to the supply system. They've already got processes in place for you to get that supply, but we're trying to do a contract, or we're trying to use the GPC card, government purchase card, because we don't want to go through the supply system. So make sure that what it is, it has an NSN, that automatically stock number that tells you that you should be going through the supply system to do that. Time, 31 U.S. Code 1502. So purpose is 31 U.S. Code 1301. Time, 31 U.S. Code 1502. You must consider the bona fide need. Automatically, the typical rule is current year needs, you use current funds. Current requirements, you use current fiscal year funds. So bona fide need. Remember that appropriations have timelines. Some are annual, as I mentioned, multi-year or no year, right? Your working capital funds that keep operating. Like your commissaries, they put the food on the shelf, they take their money, put the food on the shelf, then they charge the customer a particular price based on how much it costs them to put it on the shelf, and then they keep that revolving process going. So those are no year appropriation. So your expense type appropriation or your annual appropriation is MILPERS, military purse. This is what pay the soldiers, and operations and maintenance, what we use for training and almost everything else that we do. These are 1 year appropriations, annual expense type. RDT&E, Research, Development, Technology, and Evaluation, are 2 year appropriations. That means they're available for 2 years for new obligations. Investment type, these take a little bit longer, are your procurement. You're buying a system, computer system, and it costs X amount of dollars. You got to use procurement funds, and X amount of dollars meaning it's over $250,000. You got to use procurement funds, so that is a 3 year appropriations when you get these funds. Investment type is also military construction, and shipbuilding, conversion, Navy, which are both 5 year appropriations. And remember, if you have construction projects less than $2 million, that you can also use O&M funds to do so. Your no year, as mentioned, is Defense Working Capital Fund. That's the revolving funds, so they don't have to go back to Congress every year. Once they have a particular purpose, they're still being used, that agency can continuously revolve the funds, charge the customer different. So that's why you'll see the prices change over time, because they have to adjust the prices. But the goal of the working capital fund, unlike a civilian organization, the goal is to break even. So on the government side, we cannot earn a profit. So they have to, if they consistently earn a profit by the prices that they charge, then the next few years they have to lower the cost of that item that they charge us. Appropriation life cycle. So every appropriation goes through phase 1, which is whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3, or 5, that is their phase 1. Current, open, and they are available for new obligations. Phase 2, the account is expired. Expired means I cannot start any new contract off of this money, but I still have the money to make adjustments, meaning I already had an existing contract in phase 1, and once it switches to phase 2, the only thing I can do is make upward and downward adjustments to this contract. Every appropriation stays in the expired state for an additional 5 years. So let's say it's a construction project that's good, phase 1 for 5 years, then it expired, it'll stay expired for an additional 5 years. So that's now 10 years. And then the 11th year is phase 3, it's closed or canceled. That means the funds are no longer available for us to use. That's why when you work your unliquidated obligations, your ULOs, you're trying to do your due diligence in closing out, making adjustments on those contracts, returning funds, using the funds to do something else, because once that enters phase 3 on 1 October, you cannot no longer utilize those funds. When it comes to a closed or canceled contract in fiscal law, it also says that, however, you can use current appropriation up to 1%. Let's say a bill comes in and it's only $200 for using O&M funds. If you have it in your current appropriation, the same type, you can use up to 1% to pay that invoice from your organization. Continuing with time, you have to deal with services. So I want to make sure that I touch on a severable service versus a non-severable service. So a severable service means whenever I get the service, let's say a cleaning service, every time they come to clean, I'm getting a benefit from that organization. The service is beneficial. So at any time, if it's no longer needed, I can cut the service off. I still would have received a benefit in the past. So what you're looking at is your obligation of that contract. So if a severable service is 12 months or less, then when the contracting officer does that contract, they will obligate the full amount of the contract with current funds, regardless if it crosses fiscal year. Got nothing to do with that, with a contract. Severable service 12 months or less, you use current appropriation to pay for it. If the contract says that it's a severable service, but it's a 13-month contract, anything above 12, you can only obligate 12 months of current year, and you have to wait until you get the new appropriation to cite and pay for that 13th month. Versus a non-severable service. A non-severable service, let's say I'm repairing a building. They come in on Monday, they come in on Wednesday. I cannot end the contract and still receive a benefit. The bottom line is, once I start that job, I have to complete it to get a full benefit of that contract. So a non-severable service means once I start the job, I must end up with a usable product. So I have to obligate the full amount of the contract, regardless if it crosses fiscal year. So that is severable, 12 months or less, greater than 12 months, how you obligate. Non-severable, you obligate the full amount. An example of a non-severable is also training. If you have a training schedule and you're supposed to learn certain things Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and let's say Wednesday you decide, okay, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, you're not going to get a certificate because you didn't complete the service. You didn't complete the training. So that is a non-severable. I have to pay for the full amount of that training. And then the final 31 Anti-Deficiency Act law that we deals with amount is 31 U.S. Code. We have three of them, 1341, 42, and 1517. So you're going to have to know the differences. 1341 says obligating or spending before you get the money. Appropriation. So that tells you it's between OMB, and appropriation comes from Congress. So if I'm obligating or spending before I get my appropriation, that is an action that happens between OMB. 31 U.S. Code 1342 says we cannot accept voluntary services. If you have an organization and you have, let's say, a GS position that's open, GS 12. If it's a paid position, I cannot have someone, General so-and-so's wife, want to come in and you don't have to pay me, just let me come in and you could train me on what you do in GFEPS, General Fund Enterprise System. So unless the statutory authority was already granted to, let's say, the Red Cross or Candy Stripers, if they have a statutory authority to volunteer, then they can volunteer. If you have the flexibility to make the position a zero position, where meaning you don't have to pay that position, you can accept voluntary services. But for most part, if it's a paid position and you pay people to come do this job, you cannot accept. If you do, then you will violate 31 U.S. Code 1342, which deals with voluntary services. And the third one, 31 U.S. Code 1517, says obligating or expending in excess of apportionment. So that's why I told you got to remember what these words mean. Appropriation, Congress, and apportionment. Who gets apportionment? The agencies. OMB gives the apportionment to the Department of Defense and the other agencies. So the DOD can violate 31 U.S. Code 1517. Now, it doesn't mean that we cannot violate at our level because the allotment that we receive, but it often means that if it's an issue that can be resolved before while it gets all the way up to our higher Army level, up to the DOD level, it'll be fixed. But if the error occurs here at the DOD and they cannot resolve it internally, then it gets reported to the president. All right, some reporting requirements. If you identify a true-fledged Anti-Deficiency Act, any one of the ones we discussed earlier, remember an ADA violation is either you're violating purpose, you're violating time, or you're violating amount. Got to be able to pinpoint which one it is. So you have to report it within 10 days of identifying that there's an issue. 10 days or 2 weeks is what's stated. I think the new book says 2 weeks, but same thing as 10 days in the older study guides. Factors such as, in our job, we cannot make a mistake. We cannot say it's oversight. We didn't mean to do it. It's a lack of intent. It does not affect our responsibility to report. So that's why we have to have a lot of checks and balances in place, because there's no room for error in what we do. The preliminary review. So once you notify your hire that you have an ADA violation, then you have to then do a review. What happened? Why did it happen? How did it happen? Who was involved? How are you going to prevent it from happening again? All of that review must be completed within 4 months from that initial date of discovery. Is there relief of accountable individuals? In some cases, they are. And these are some of the exceptions for the most part. The GAO Comptroller General. So remember, earlier when I started talking about GAO, and I used the word CG, Comptroller General, it's not Commanding General. There's no Commanding General in the CDFM. It's Comptroller General, which is the title of the individual in charge of the GAO, must grant relief for the following. So what are the following you're going to get off? Physical loss. The SecDef determines that the individual was carrying out official duty. The loss was not the result, nothing illegal. You were doing exactly, you were on a mission. You were attacked, you lost the money. The loss was not due to fail or negligence. So they're going to do an investigation. Illegal improper payment. Payment was not the result of bad faith or lack of reasonable care. Certification of payment based on official records. No law prohibited the payment. There was nothing against you making the payment. So there's nothing illegal that you did. It's just for whatever reason, the payment was improper. So all the documents, because everything we do, we have to have supporting documents to make that payment. And so based on everything that we had in front of us, it authorized us to make that payment. So what are the statutes of limitations then if you have an ADA violation? You violate the law. If it's for an error, the statute of limitation on that error is 3 years from the time the Comptroller General receives the account. So it's not 3 years from when you did it, it's 3 years from when they identified that it was an error. If it's for fraud, anything illegal, there's no time limit on that statute of limitation. So they can always come back to you. Hence, the reason why we have to study the fiscal law, we have to understand it, because once we sign those documents, they become historical information, and our name will forever be tied to those documents. So we need to ensure, and if it's determined that it was a fraud later on, we can be caught up and be called to testify in those scenarios. So make sure you follow the law in the use of those funds. A term that's used, and I think in the study guides, I only saw it one time, but I've heard people say they saw it again in the future. So Feed and Forage Act, 41 U.S. Code. This is a law that authorizes the Department of Defense. So typically, all the ADA violation says you can't spend money before you get it. You can't spend more than what you have. But the Feed and Forage Act is an exception to that. 41 U.S. Code says, let's say the Department of Defense is deployed somewhere. They're helping hurricane relief or something. It says that we can incur obligation in excess of what we have available in that appropriation. But look at the conditions. It's Got to be stuff that's necessary to buy clothing. Let's say we go to a cold environment and our personnel don't have the adequate gear that they need to stay warm, and we have to buy it right then. So that's clothing, food, heat, fuel, medical, hospital supplies. So it must not exceed your necessities of what you actually need to do. 41 U.S. Code Feed and Forage Act. So what are the GAO standards? Government Accountability Office with the crime acronym. These you'll see again. You need to know the difference between controlled environments. Management sets a positive attitude in their organization that includes integrity. We got to follow the procedures. So that positive attitude controlling the mood of that organization. The R is risk assessment. Assesses the risk that everything that we do, there's an associated risk. And so as the leader, the management, we must assess those risks and put factors in place to mitigate the risk, whether it's an internal or an external. So you got to identify what the objectives are for the organization. The I is information and communication. You can have policies, standard operating procedures, all of these things in place, but if you're not communicating it to the lowest level, then people don't know what to follow. So information should be recorded and communicated to not just the leaders, it needs to go through down to everyone in the organization so that they can follow all the control activities that are put in place. And monitoring, that's the M, assess the quality of performance. That means you have to have checks and balances in place. You have to do your internal control inspections. You got to go behind and make sure people are following the procedures. And finally, you have existing control activities. Internal control activities help ensure that the management directives are carried out. So you also have to review, in the study guide, they go into specific actions under each one. I would advise you to go back to that particular study guide and review those particular actions. All right, switching gears, now we're going to look at some ethics when it comes to fiscal law, what you can and cannot take from contractors that works or supports the government. So an exceptions to accepting gifts. So typically they say you cannot accept gifts from a contractor. So it becomes an exception because it says if a contractor gives you a gift and the value of the gift is $20 or less, yes, you can accept it. But within that annual year, you cannot accept a total of $50 worth of gifts from the same contractor. What am I talking about? Let's say the contractor gives me a pen, right? I got a pen here. And the pen is $20. And then later on that year, they want to give me a binder. And the binder is $60. The book is $60. I cannot accept that book. One, it's above the $20 threshold, but the 20 I already took and the 60 puts me annually over $70, right? So 6, 7, 8, $80 right there. So it's over the $50 threshold is basically what I'm trying to say. So you have to look at both conditions. The one gift cannot be more than 20, and altogether they cannot exceed 50. If the gift, this is an exception, if the gift is based on a personal relationship, I knew you before the job, we worked together, we went to the same high school, we've kept up personal relationship, you can accept the gift, whatever the gift is. If the gift is based on outside business or employment relationship, same thing like this one, outside of your job. It's not because I work for this organization, so you're giving me a gift. I can't take that. Gift in connection with political activities. So it's saying there's an exception if you participate and you support a political candidate and they give you a gift. But I would still be careful with those. So make sure you check with your ethics lawyers before you accept any gift. And even with me doing this study group, I also had checked with legal to make sure that as long as I don't accept any money from people, then I'm good to go. I'm not charging for it, nor do I accept any funding to do this. The issue will come in if people start paying me to do this and I'm getting paid by the government. Employees may accept gift of free attendance to an event if and only if a determination has been made that going to the event is necessary for that job. So it's not just, okay, well, they gave me a free ticket to a game, so I'm going to go. Why are you going? Are they trying to bribe you? So you got to ask yourself, what are some more things? Executive branch employees may not give or take a gift from an employee who makes less than they do, right? You don't have that one employee who wants to bring you this nice gift and it's only you get. Every time you turn around, he or she's giving you a gift. Don't take it. Don't do it. Get yourself caught up. Occasions where gifts are normally given are permitted to give gifts to supervisors, but the value of the gift must be less. So it doesn't mean the gift itself is less. It means that whatever individual person is giving, they are limited to $10. So if they coming around and somebody's leaving and I want to donate, I can donate up to $10. Once you start giving more, then they start wondering, okay, why are you giving more? But legally, ethically, $10 is a limit. Employee contribution, and it's voluntary, right? You can't make people donate money because towards somebody else's gift. You put it out there. Would you like to donate? It's a voluntary, and the $10 limit still applies. You may also buy food. Excuse me, Mr. Telemarketer. May buy food and refreshments shared in the office. So that's ethically, that's legal. As long as everybody is partaking, you're not just bringing food for that one supervisor or for that one employee. You may buy food and refreshments shared in the office. Personal hospitality in the employee's home is allowed. Again, as long as you open it up to everyone who would like to come, you can do things in your home with your employees. And honoraria payments. So honoraria payments talks about, let's say you graduated from the University of North Carolina and you got an invitation to come and speak at a graduation, and they say they're going to pay you, for your time. There's some conditions where you can and cannot take the payment. So you can take the money if they're only inviting you because you graduated from the University of North Carolina. You're an alumni of the college. So we're going to invite you and pay you. If they invite you because you work for the Department of Defense, Budget Organization, Office of Management and Budget, you cannot take the payment because under Title V, U.S. Code Title V, which is where most of the civilians are, DOD civilians are governed under, you are double dipping, meaning you're getting paid from the government. You can't go perform in your official capacity and get paid again. So that'll be illegal. So honoraria payments is a topic you have to be familiar with the CDFM. All right, so I throw some practical exercises in here to kind of go over some of the things you may see again. So if I say today is November the 4th, 2015, you were just given RDT&E funds. When will those funds be closed? Okay, and this is all I give you. How do you know how to do this exercise? Well, you got to look at what's given to you. So a couple of things given to you. They told you you have RDT&E funds. And you have to know that what's the life cycle for me to spend those funds. It's a 2-year appropriation. So RDT&E is a 2-year appropriation. You also need to know what fiscal year are you in. If it's November the 4th, 2015, we are in fiscal year 2016 because we operate under fiscal year. So you need to know what fiscal year you're in. And with those two information, now you know it's open, phase 1, it's good from FY16 and FY17 because it's a 2-year appropriation. So it's good for new obligations for 2 years, 16 and 17. What's the question asking me? When will those funds be closed? So I haven't gotten to my answer yet. The next thing it says, after it's open for them 2 years, then it's expired. How long is an appropriation expired? Every appropriation is expired for an additional 5 years. So this particular RDT&E fund will be expired FY 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 5 years. So that means it will be closed in FY 23. So these FY 16 funds, make sure I said that right, yeah, will be closed, and in RDT&E funds will be closed in FY 23. Here's another one. Today is October 1st, 2011. You were just given Milcon funds. When will those funds be in the expired state? Same thing. Milcon is a 5-year appropriation. We are in fiscal year 12 because October 2011 is fiscal year 12. So it's open for 5 years. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, FY 12 through 16. It's through 16, not and 16. 5 years. Then it will be expired for an additional 5 years. But I don't want to give you that yet. So I'm going to go to when is it closed? FY 22. So let's see if we did that right. So it is expired 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. That's what I should have here, dash. FY 17 to FY 21, which is 5 years, which means it'll be closed in FY 22. So these military construction funds will be expired, to answer the question asked, will be expired FY 17 to FY 21. So that's the time frame, because it's not just 1 year. So well, I got one more. Availability of funds. So remember the part about unapportioned, unappropriated, no, on allotment, yeah, unapportioned allotment and so forth. So that's what this is. So you might see something like this where you get the appropriation. So this is the order: appropriate, apportion, allotment, obligate, and outlay. 49 million, 22, 19, 15, and 10.5. So the computation is what you would have to do. So you have the term, and they will not give you the formula. So just imagine if these two columns are gone, and they say, what's the unallotted apportionment? Unallotted means it's not done yet. So that means it's a portion, but it's not allotted yet. So that's your 22 minus a 19, that's 3 million, and so forth. Almost done. So conclusion, the expenditure of public fund is proper, meaning is correct to do only when authorized by Congress, not that the funds may be expended unless prohibited. So like some other standards, like military standards, they say, well, the Army standard didn't say I couldn't do it, so that means I can do it, because I used to do that. I can run with my not headphones, with my, why can't I run with my cell phone in my hand playing music? I don't have any headphones in my ears, nope. So I used to run with my cell phone in my hand or on my body in my shorts, and the music was playing when I was running alone. And sometimes people would say something. I was like, well, no, the regulation didn't say I couldn't have my cell phone on me while I'm running. But unlike that, on the budget side, you can't do that. You can't look at what's not written. You have to look at what is written and what you can and cannot do. So this was just an overview snapshot of the fiscal law, combining module 1, 2, and 3 to kind of sync all the information together, and you will see it overlaps when you study the material. So this was Fiscal Law 101. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I'll see you guys again next time.